The rain started as a light mist when I left the road. I remember thinking it would pass in a few minutes, the way summer rain sometimes does. I was wrong. Within 10 minutes, the sky turned dark like someone had pulled a heavy lid over the world. The rain came down hard and fast, slapping the ground, soaking my clothes until they stuck to my skin. My hair clung to my face and my shoes filled with water, each step making a soft squelching sound. I had been hiking longer than planned. The trail markers were old and hard to see, and the map on my phone stopped loading once the signal dropped. I kept walking because standing still felt worse. The forest around me grew thicker, the trees packed closer together, their branches shaking as the wind pushed through them. Leaves and small sticks fell around me. The air smelled sharp and wet, like mud and crushed plants. The sound of thunder rolled low and deep, not sharp but heavy, like something big moving across the sky. Each time it happened, my chest tightened. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to stay calm. I knew panic would only make things worse. Still, my hands shook, partly from the cold and partly from the fear that I might be lost for real. That was when I saw the cabin. At first, it looked like just another shadow between the trees. Then the shape became clearer. 4 walls. A slanted roof. It sat slightly lower than the surrounding ground, as if it had sunk over time. The wood was dark and uneven. Some boards warped and cracked. The roof sagged in the middle, and moss grew along the edges like a thick green line. I didn't think much before moving toward it. The rain was too strong to ignore. My jacket was thin and useless now, and my fingers felt stiff. The ground near the cabin was muddy, and my foot slid as I stepped closer, splashing cold water up my leg. I grabbed the side of the building to steady myself. The wood felt rough and soft at the same time, old enough to give slightly under pressure. The door was closed but not locked. It creaked as I pushed it open, the sound long and sharp in the quiet space between thunder. Inside, the air smelled stale and damp like wet dust. The light was dim, coming only through a small window on one side, streaked with dirt and rain. Water dripped from my clothes onto the wooden floor, leaving dark spots that slowly spread. The cabin was one room. There was an old table pushed against the wall, one leg shorter than the others, making it tilt. A broken chair lay on its side nearby. In the corner there was a metal stove, rusted and cold, with no sign it had been used in years. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, thick in some places, broken in others where the wind had pushed through cracks in the walls. I stood near the door for a moment, listening. Rain hammered on the roof, loud and steady. Wind slipped through the gaps in the wood, making a low whistling sound. The door behind me rattled slightly as the wind pressed against it. I closed it slowly, careful not to slam it. The sound of rain became duller but still loud enough to fill my head. I moved deeper into the cabin, each step careful. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Some felt solid, others soft, like they might break if I stepped wrong. I kept my weight light, spreading it evenly, moving slow. My breathing sounded too loud to me, and I tried to slow it down. The longer I stayed inside, the more details I noticed. Scratches on the walls, not deep, but repeated, like something had been dragged along them many times. Old nails stuck out in places, bent and rusted. In one corner there were dark stains on the floor, wide and uneven, impossible to tell what they had been from. The sight made my stomach twist. I told myself to focus on facts. This was just an old cabin. People built these all the time, years ago, for hunting or storage. It had probably been abandoned when the land stopped being used. There was nothing special about it. Still, my eyes kept moving, checking every shadow, every dark corner. The rain grew heavier. Water began to drip through the roof in 2 places, landing with soft taps on the floor. One drip landed close to my foot, and I stepped back without thinking, my heart jumping. The sound of thunder came again, louder this time, followed by a flash of light that filled the window for a split second. The cabin shook slightly, or maybe it was just my legs trembling. Time moved strangely inside that room. Minutes felt long, stretched thin by the constant noise of rain and the tight feeling in my chest. I sat on the edge of the old table, testing it first to make sure it could hold my weight.
It wobbled but stayed upright. I wrapped my arms around myself again, rubbing my hands together to bring back some warmth. That was when I noticed the footprints. They were faint, pressed into the dust near the back wall. They weren't mine. I could tell because they were already there when I came in, half covered but still visible. They looked recent enough to still have shape. The toes were clear, the heel marks deep. They led from the back corner towards the door, then stopped. My mouth went dry. I stayed still, staring at them, my mind racing. Someone else had been here. Maybe not right now, but not long ago either. The idea made the cabin feel smaller, tighter, like the walls had moved closer. I stood up slowly, careful not to make noise. The rain outside covered small sounds, but inside everything felt loud. I stepped back towards the door, watching the footprints the whole time. My heart beat hot against my ribs. I could feel it in my throat. Another sound reached me then, different from the rain. It was soft and uneven, like movement on wet ground. It came from outside, somewhere close. I froze. My body went cold, every muscle tight. I leaned slightly toward the door, listening harder. The sound came again. Slow, heavy. Not an animal running, but something moving with weight and care. My thoughts blurred together, fear pushing them into a single sharp point. I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the rough wood. At that moment, the sound stopped. Seconds passed. Nothing else followed. Only the rain, steady and loud. I waited longer, my hands still near the door, my breathing shallow. When nothing happened, I forced myself to think clearly again. Sounds travel strange in rain. Wind can make things seem closer than they are. I opened the door just enough to see outside. Rain poured down in thick lines, the ground a mess of mud and water. No stood there. No shape moved between the trees. The forest looked empty, blurred by rain and distance. I closed the door again and leaned my back against it, sliding down until I sat on the floor. My legs felt weak. I stayed like that for a long time, counting my breaths, waiting for my heart to slow down. Eventually, the rain began to ease. It didn't stop all at once, but slowly, the sound changing from a roar to a steady fall, then to lighter taps. The sky outside grew brighter, the dark gray lifting into a dull silver. I stood up, my joints stiff, my clothes still heavy with water. When I opened the door this time, the forest looked different, calmer. The air smelled clean, washed. I stepped outside carefully, the mud pulling at my shoes. I looked back at the cabin once more. It stood silent, empty, just wood and nails and time. I followed the slope downhill, trusting that water would lead me toward a lower path. After some time, I found a wider trail, one I recognized. Relief washed over me so strong my knees almost gave out. I kept walking until I reached the road, then waited until a passing truck slowed and stopped. Later, dry and warm, I thought about the cabin again, about the footprints, about the sounds. I never found out who had been there or when. What stayed with me was not a monster or a ghost, but the simple truth that being alone, wet and unsure in a place forgotten by time can be terrifying enough. I made it out because I stayed calm, paid attention, and left when I could. That night I slept knowing I had been scared, but also knowing I had survived something real.
The rain started light, the kind that feels like mist on your skin, but it turned heavy fast. I was already far from the road when the sky broke open. Thick drops slammed into the dirt and leaves, loud enough to drown out everything else. Within minutes, my hair was soaked, my shirt stuck to my back, and my shoes were full of water. The path I had been following faded away like it had never been there. Trees closed in around me, tall and dark, their branches bending and shaking in the wind. I kept walking because stopping felt worse. The rain made the air cold, and my hands started to shake. Every step felt heavier as the ground turned soft and slippery. Mud grabbed at my shoes and tried to pull them off. I slipped more than once and caught myself on wet tree trunks, my palms burning from the rough bark. The smell of wet earth filled my nose, thick and heavy, mixed with old leaves and rot. I don't know how long I walked like that. Time felt stretched and thin. The light faded fast, like someone turning a dimmer switch. Shadows grew longer and deeper between the trees. Thunder rolled somewhere far away, low and slow, like something large moving in the dark. Each time it came, my chest tightened. That was when I saw the cabin. At first, it looked like just another shape in the rain. A dark block sitting, wrong among the trees. I almost walked past it, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then lightning flashed and lit it up for a split second. Wooden walls. A slanted roof. A small porch leaning to one side. I felt a mix of relief and fear hit me at the same time. Relief because it meant shelter. Fear because abandoned places never feel empty, even when they are. He walked closer slowly. The cabin looked old, like it had been left alone for years. The rain drummed hard on the roof, the sound deep and hollow. Parts of the wood were gray and split. The windows were dark, one of them cracked with a jagged line running through the glass. The door hung crooked on its hinges, slightly open, moving back and forth with the wind. The porch boards creaked under my weight. I froze for a second, listening. The rain was so loud it covered everything else. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Old wood, damp air, and something sour underneath, like mold that had grown too long without light. The inside was darker than I expected. Only thin strips of gray light came through the windows. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into a puddle on the floor. I closed the door as much as it would close. It didn't shut all the way, leaving a narrow gap where rain and cold air slipped through. Still, it felt better than being outside. The cabin was one room. A broken table sat in the center, its surface rough and swollen from water. One chair lay on its side, missing a leg. In the corner, there was an old mattress, stained dark in places I didn't want to think about. Shelves lined one wall, mostly empty, but a few rusted cans still sat there, their labels peeled away. I stood there breathing hard, trying to calm myself. My clothes were soaked, and cold crept into my bones. My teeth started to chatter, and I wrapped my arms around myself. That was when I noticed the floor. There were marks in the dust and dirt, footprints. Not fresh, but not old enough to be forgotten either. They moved from the door to the shelves, then toward the back corner, then back again. My stomach dropped. This place wasn't as abandoned as it looked. I forced myself to stay still and listen. The rain kept pounding the roof, loud and steady. Wind pushed against the walls, making them groan softly. Underneath it all, there was nothing else. No movement, no breathing, no sound that didn't belong to the storm. I moved deeper into the cabin, slow and careful. Each step made the floor creak, sharp and loud in the quiet space between thunder. I hated that sound. It felt like the cabin was announcing every move I made. Near the back wall, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Scratches in the wood. Long, uneven lines carved into the wall at about shoulder height. Some were deep, others lighter, overlapping each other like someone had dragged something sharp across the boards again and again. I didn't touch them. I didn't want to know how they got there. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, brighter this time. In that brief light, I saw a dark shape near the mattress, a pile of clothes. At least that's what I thought it was until I looked closer. It was a blanket, thick, old, and damp. Under it, something bulky made an uneven shape. My heart started to race. I stood frozen, staring at it, waiting for it to move. It didn't. The rain got heavier, if that was even possible. Water started to leak in through the roof faster, adding to the puddles on the floor. I knew I couldn't stay here long, but going back outside felt worse. Night was falling fast, and the storm showed no sign of stopping. I backed away from the mattress and moved toward the shelves. My eyes scanned everything, looking for anything useful. Most of the cans were rusted shut, but one looked less damaged. I didn't try to open it. I didn't want the noise. I sat on the floor against the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. The wood was cold and damp through my clothes. I tried to make myself small, like that would somehow keep me safe. Time passed slowly. Every sound made me tense. The wind hitting the cabin sounded like footsteps circling outside. The branches scraping the walls sounded like fingers dragging along the wood. My mind kept filling in gaps with things I didn't want to imagine. At some point, I realized the footprints on the floor were leading toward where I was sitting. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down.
In the thin layer of dirt near my feet, I could see my own footprints mixed with older ones. Different sizes, different patterns. Whoever made them had been here not too long ago. The thought sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't alone out here. Maybe not now, but not long ago. The storm began to fade slowly. The rain softened from a roar to a steady fall. Thunder moved farther away. The silence that followed felt worse. Without the noise, every small sound inside the cabin felt too loud. I waited. My muscles ached from being tense for so long. Cold seeped deeper into me, making my hands numb. I didn't sleep.
I don't think I could have, even if I tried.
When the rain finally stopped, it felt unreal. The air outside smelled clean and sharp. Morning light slowly pushed its way through the windows, pale and weak.
I stood up carefully, my legs stiff. In the daylight, the cabin looked even worse. The scratches on the wall were clearer. The blanket near the mattress was darker than I thought, stained in places that made my stomach turn. I didn't stay to look any longer. I stepped outside onto the porch. The ground was soaked, the forest dripping and quiet. Mist hung low between two trees. Birds were starting to move, their sounds cautious and far apart. I followed what I hoped was the right direction, using the slope of the land and the thin trail left by water runoff. After what felt like hours, I found a dirt road. Tier tracks cut through the mud, fresh enough to still hold water. I walked until my legs burned and my throat hurt from breathing cold air. Eventually, the road led to a wider path, then to a paved road. A car passed by, slowing when it saw me standing there, soaked and shaking. I was safe after that, cold, tired, and shaken, but safe. Even now, I still think about that cabin, about the footprints on the floor and the scratches on the wall, about the feeling of being watched without seeing anyone. I don't know who used that place or why they left it the way they did. I only know that I was lucky. The storm trapped me there for one night, and that was enough to understand that some shelters are only safer from the weather, not from what hides in places people forget. The rain started as a thin mist, the kind that feels harmless at first, like it will pass in a few minutes. I remember thinking I could keep walking and be fine. The sky was already dark, heavy with thick gray clouds that pressed low over the trees. The path I was on had been clear earlier in the day, but now it was slowly turning into mud under my shoes. Every step made a soft sucking sound, like the ground was trying to pull me down and keep me there. Within minutes, the mist turned into heavy rain. It didn't fall gently. It came down hard, fast, and cold, soaking my hair and clothes until everything clung to my skin. My jacket stopped helping almost right away. Water ran down my neck and into my boots, making my socks wet and heavy. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold and partly from the sudden fear that settled in my chest. The forest around me changed when the rain got stronger. Sounds became louder and sharper. Leaves slapped against each other. Branches creaked and bent. The wind pushed through the trees in uneven bursts, making everything feel unstable. I had no phone signal. I checked more than once, even though I already knew it was useless. The screen was wet and smeared with water, and the battery was already low. I kept it in my pocket after that, trying to save what little power I had left. The light was fading quickly, not because it was late, but because the storm swallowed what little daylight was left. Shadows stretched between the trees, and the forest felt tighter, more closed in. That's when I saw the cabin. It was barely visible at first, hidden behind a wall of trees and thick bushes. I noticed a straight line where there shouldn't have been one, something that didn't belong in the natural mess of branches and leaves. I moved closer, slipping once on a wet rock and catching myself on a tree trunk. My heart was beating fast, loud in my ears. As I pushed through the bushes, the cabin came into full view. It was old, really old. The wood was dark and swollen from years of rain and rot. Parts of the roof sagged inward, and one corner looked like it might collapse at any moment. The windows were either broken or missing entirely, leaving black, empty holes that stared back at me. The door hung crooked on its hinges, half open, swaying slightly in the wind. It didn't look safe, but it looked dry enough, and right then, dry felt like survival. I hesitated at the entrance, my body screaming at me to be careful. The rain was pounding so hard on the roof and the ground that it was hard to hear anything else. I stepped inside quickly, pulling the door shut behind me as much as it would allow. It didn't close all the way, leaving a narrow gap where rainwater still slipped through and ran across the floor in thin streams. The inside smelled like damp wood, mold, and something sour, like old water that had been trapped for too long. The floorboards were uneven and soft in places. I tested each step carefully, afraid one wrong move would send my foot straight through the floor. The room was mostly empty. There were no chairs, no table, nothing that suggested anyone had lived there recently. Just broken boards, fallen pieces of the roof, and piles of dirt and leaves that had blown in over time. Rain drummed loudly overhead, hitting the roof in a constant, violent rhythm. Every now and then, water would drip from a crack and splash onto the floor. The sound echoed inside the small space, making it feel even more isolated. He stood there for a moment, catching my breath, my chest raising and falling fast. My clothes were soaked, my hair stuck to my face, and my fingers felt numb. As my eyes adjusted to the low light, I noticed marks on the walls, long scratches in the wood, uneven and deep. They weren't new, but they also didn't look ancient. Some were darker than others, like they had been made at different times. I didn't want to think too hard about what caused them. I focused on staying warm and dry. I moved to the corner that seemed the least damaged and leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor with my knees pulled to my chest. Time moved strangely in that cabin. The storm outside felt endless. The rain never slowed, never softened. Thunder rolled in the distance, not close enough to shake the ground, but close enough to remind me how small and exposed I was. The wind made the cabin groan and shift. Every creak made my muscles tense. I kept expecting the roof to give in or a wall to collapse. At some point, I heard footsteps. They were faint at first, almost lost under the sound of the rain. I froze, holding my breath, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I listened carefully, straining to separate real sounds from the noise of the storm. The steps came again, slow and uneven, like someone moving carefully through the mud outside. They circled the cabin once, stopping near the door. I stayed completely still. My body felt heavy, like it was pressed into the floor. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quiet. Water continued to drip from the ceiling. The footsteps paused for a long moment. Then I heard the soft scrape of something against the wood, like a hand brushing the wall or the door. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away. They faded slowly, swallowed by the rain and the wind. I waited long after they were gone, counting my breaths, making sure I wasn't imagining things. My legs cramped from holding still for so long, but I didn't shift until I was sure I was alone again.
The fear didn't leave after that. It sat with me, heavy and cold. Every sound felt like a warning. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. The rain continued through the night, soaking the ground outside and leaking into the cabin in more places as time passed. I stayed in the cabin because I had no other choice, but I never relaxed.
Eventually, the storm began to weaken. The rain softened, turning from a violent roar into a steady, tired fall.
The sky lightened just enough to tell me morning was coming. My body ached from the cold and the hard floor. I stood slowly, my joints stiff, and looked around one last time. The cabin felt even more broken in the dim morning light.
It was never meant to protect anyone for long.
I stepped outside carefully. The forest looked different now. Cleaned, washed, but also damaged.
Branches were scattered everywhere. The ground was thick with mud and water. I followed the direction I thought would lead me back to the main path, moving slowly, watching my footing. After a long walk, I reached the road. It felt unreal, like stepping back into a different world. A few hours later, I was safe, dry, and warm, but the memory stayed with me. The sound of rain on wood, the smell of that cabin, the feeling of being watched without ever seeing anything. I never went back there. I never tried to find that cabin again. Some places are meant to be left alone, not because of anything supernatural, but because of what can happen when you are vulnerable, cold, and trapped with your own fear. I survived that night because the storm ended and because whatever was outside decided to leave. That was enough for me. The sky was gray when I left. But gray skies are normal where I live, and I told myself it would just drizzle for a bit and pass. I had been walking on an old trail that cut through a stretch of forest I barely knew. It wasn't a hiking trip or anything special. I just wanted to clear my head and take a long walk away from noise, phones, and people. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, but I ignored that too. When the rain started, it wasn't gentle. It hit the leaves hard, like handfuls of gravel being thrown from above. Within minutes, my hair was soaked and my shirt clung to my skin. The dirt path turned dark and slippery, and every step started to feel uncertain. The sound of rain swallowed everything else. Birds went silent. The forest felt empty but loud at the same time. I tried to keep moving forward, thinking I would reach the main road soon, but the rain got worse. Wind pushed the trees so hard they creaked. Water ran down my face and into my eyes, making it hard to see. My shoes filled with water and my socks felt like sponges. I started to feel cold, not the sharp cold of winter, but a deep, uncomfortable chill that settles into your bones. That's when I saw it. Through the sheets of rain and between the trees, there was a dark shape that didn't move like the rest of the forest. It was solid and straight, with hard edges. At first, I thought it might be a big rock or a fallen tree stacked in a strange way. But as I got closer, I realized it was a cabin. It looked old, really old. The wood was dark from years of weather, and parts of the roof sagged slightly in the middle. One window was broken, and the other was so dirty it looked black. The door hung crooked, not fully closed, not fully open. It didn't look welcoming, but it looked dry, and that mattered more than anything else in that moment. I hesitated for a few seconds. I didn't like the idea of going inside some abandoned place in the middle of nowhere, but the rain was pouring harder now, and thunder rolled so loudly it felt like it was inside my chest. I was shaking, my hands numb, my teeth starting to chatter. Staying outside felt more dangerous than going in. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. It groaned loudly, the sound sharp and rough, like it hadn't been moved in a long time. Inside, it was darker than I expected. The only light came from the broken window and the thin gap around the door. The smell hit me right away. Damp wood, mold, old dust, and something else underneath it all. Something sour and stale. The floor was wooden and uneven. Some boards looked swollen from water, others cracked. I stepped carefully, testing each step before putting my full weight down. The rain drummed on the roof, loud and steady, but at least it wasn't hitting me anymore. I leaned against the wall for a moment and tried to slow my breathing. The cabin was small, just one main room. There was an old table pushed against one wall, one leg shorter than the other so it leaned to the side. A broken chair lay on the floor, its back snapped clean off. In the corner there was what looked like a small stove, rusted and empty. Cobwebs stretched across the ceiling beams, thick and heavy, like they had been there for years. I walked further in, my footsteps loud in the quiet space. Every sound I made felt too big. The floor creaked under me, and each creak made my heart jump. I kept expecting something to move in the dark corners, but nothing did. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone crept in slowly, like a cold hand on my back. I told myself it was just my nerves. Being tired, cold, and wet can mess with your head. I stood near the center of the room and took off my soaked jacket, wringing water out of it. Drops hit the floor and soaked into the wood. My hands shook as I worked, partly from the cold, partly from fear I didn't want to admit. Zonda cracked again, closer this time. The whole cabin vibrated, dust falling from the ceiling in a thin cloud. I looked up, suddenly aware of how fragile the place was. I wondered how long it had been abandoned, who built it, who lived there, why they left. I noticed marks on the walls then, not writing, not drawings, just long scratches in the wood, deep and uneven. They were at different heights, some near the floor, some higher up. I ran my fingers near them but didn't touch. The wood around the scratches was darker, like it had been worn down over time. I backed away from that wall and moved toward the broken window. Outside, the rain blurred everything into gray streaks. Trees bent and swayed, their branches whipping back and forth. I couldn't see the trail anymore. I couldn't even tell which direction I had come from. The light started to fade. I hadn't realized how late it had gotten. The storm had made time feel strange, like it was stretching and shrinking at the same time. Inside the cabin, shadows grew thicker. The corners disappeared into darkness.
I found an old blanket folded on the floor near the stove. It smelled bad and was stiff with dirt, but it was dry. I sat down against the wall and wrapped it around my shoulders, trying to trap some warmth. My clothes were still wet and my skin felt tight and uncomfortable. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was hard to tell. The rain didn't let up. Water leaked through a small hole in the roof, dripping steadily into a metal pan someone had left there long ago. The sound of the drip became maddening, counting time in a way I didn't like. At some point, I heard another sound. Not loud, not clear, just a shift. A creak that didn't match the wind or the rain. My body tensed instantly. I held my breath, listening hard. The sound came again, slow and heavy, like pressure being put on old wood. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff. My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I scanned the room, every shadow, every dark space. Nothing moved. The door stayed still. The window showed only rain. Then I realized what the sound was. Water. The rain had found its way under the cabin and into the floor. The boards were swelling, rubbing against each other as they soaked up more moisture. The cabin wasn't reacting to me. It was reacting to the storm. That realization didn't fully calm me, but it helped. I sat back down, keeping my eyes open, forcing myself to stay aware. I thought about how people scare themselves when they're tired and afraid. I focused on facts. I was sheltered. I was alive. The storm would end.
Eventually, it did.
Slowly the rain softened. The loud drumming on the roof turned into a steady patter, then into a light tapping. Thunder moved farther away until it was just a low rumble, then nothing at all. Silence settled over the forest in a way that felt strange after so much noise. Light crept back through the window, pale and weak, but enough to show the room clearly again. The scratches on the wall looked less threatening in daylight, just old damage. The cabin looked sad, more than scary now. I stepped outside carefully. The air smelled clean, washed. Everything dripped and shined. The ground was muddy, but the path was visible again. I could see where it curved towards the road. I took one last look at the cabin. It stood quiet and still, just a forgotten building doing what it had always done, offering shelter, then being left behind again. I walked away, slow but steady, my body tired and sore. When I finally reached the road and saw a car pass by, relief hit me so hard I had to stop and breathe. I didn't look back. That night stayed with me. Not because of something supernatural or impossible, but because of how thin the line felt between safe and unsafe. A little more rain, a little less shelter, and the ending could have been very different. I learned that fear doesn't always come from monsters or ghosts. Sometimes it comes from being alone, wet, cold, and unsure if the place keeping you alive will hold together long enough to let you leave.
The rain started as a thin mist and turned heavy so fast that it felt planned, like the sky had been waiting for me to get far enough away from the road. I had been hiking alone all afternoon, following a narrow trail that barely looked used anymore. The trees were tall and close together, blocking most of the light even before the clouds rolled in. My phone had no signal for hours, and I had stopped checking it because it only made me more aware of how alone I was. When the rain finally came down hard, it wasn't gentle or calm. It slammed into the leaves, the dirt, my jacket, my hair. Within minutes, I was soaked all the way through. The path turned into mud under my shoes. Every step slipped a little, and my legs started to shake from trying to keep balance. The rain was loud, so loud that it drowned out everything else. I couldn't hear birds anymore. I couldn't hear the wind. Just the rain hitting everything at once. My breathing got faster, not because I was tired, but because the cold was setting in. My hands felt stiff, and my fingers were starting to lose feeling. I knew staying out in that rain for too long was a bad idea. That's when I saw the cabin. It was barely visible at first, hidden behind a wall of trees and bushes. If the rain wasn't so heavy, I might have walked right past it. The roof was dark and uneven, and part of it looked like it had sunk in over time. The walls were made of old wood, gray and cracked, with patches where the boards had split or fallen away. It didn't look safe or welcoming, but it looked dry, and that was enough. I pushed through wet branches and tall grass to get to it. My shoes sank into the mud near the door, and I almost fell forward. The door itself was slightly open, hanging crooked on rusty hinges. I hesitated for a moment, standing there with rain running down my face and into my eyes. The smell of wet dirt and rot filled my nose. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't see any better option. I stepped in. The inside of the cabin was dark and cold, but the sound of the rain softened a little once the door was behind me. The floor was covered in dust, old leaves, and what looked like animal droppings. The air smelled stale, like nothing had moved in there for a long time. My shoes left wet prints as I walked a few steps in, and the sound of my steps felt too loud in the quiet space. There was almost nothing inside. A broken table leaned against one wall. A chair lay on its side, missing a leg. The walls were scratched and stained, and parts of the ceiling had dark spots where water had leaked through for years. I could see daylight through thin cracks in the wood. It wasn't a strong shelter, but it was better than standing outside in the rain. He stood there, dripping, listening. The rain was still heavy, hitting the roof in uneven bursts. Every now and then, water slipped through the damaged roof and fell to the floor with a slow drip. I hugged myself, trying to keep warm. My clothes clung to my skin and my teeth started to chatter. I told myself to calm down, to just wait it out. Storms pass. That was a normal thought, a safe thought. Then I noticed the marks. They were on the floor near the back wall. At first I thought they were just scratches or dirt dragged around by animals. But when I looked closer, they looked more like boot prints, half filled with dust. They were old, but not ancient. The shape was clear enough to tell they were made by someone wearing heavy shoes. They led toward the back corner of the cabin, where the light was worst. I didn't move toward them. I stayed where I was, near the door, telling myself there were many reasons for those prints to be there. Hunters, workers, anyone. Still, my chest felt tight. The idea that someone had been here, maybe not that long ago, sat heavy in my head. A loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, making the walls vibrate. Dust fell from the ceiling, and I flinched hard, my heart jumping. The rain got even heavier after that, like the storm was angry. Water started to run under the door in a thin line, soaking the floor near my feet. I stepped back without thinking, deeper into the cabin, away from the door. That's when I saw the mattress. It was pushed against the far wall, almost hidden behind the broken table. The fabric was torn, stained dark in places, and damp. It wasn't just trash left behind, it looked used. Around it were empty cans, old food wrappers, and a plastic bottle crushed flat. Everything was dusty, but not as dusty as the rest of the cabin. It felt wrong, like the air changed around that spot. My heart started to pound harder. I felt it in my ears. I realized then that this cabin wasn't just abandoned. Someone had been staying here. Maybe not now, maybe not today, but recently enough. I stood completely still, listening as hard as I could. The rain made it difficult. Every sound blended together. My mind started filling the quiet gaps with thoughts I didn't want. What if someone came back? What if they were already nearby, waiting out the storm somewhere else? The cabin suddenly felt much smaller, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. Another sound cut through the rain. Not loud, but clear enough to make my stomach drop. Something brushed against the outside wall. Slowly, like a body moving past it. I held my breath without realizing it. My hands trembled at my sides. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The sound stopped. Seconds passed. Maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. My legs started to ache from standing so stiff. My mind kept telling me to leave, to run back into the rain, but my body wouldn't listen. The storm outside was still violent, and the thought of slipping in the mud, falling, getting hurt out there felt just as dangerous. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, not inside cabin, outside, close. I backed up until my shoulders touched the wall. The wood felt cold and rough through my wet jacket. My breathing became shallow. I focused on keeping it quiet. The footsteps moved around the cabin, stopping near the door. I could see a shadow under the gap at the bottom, shifting slightly as someone stood there. The door didn't open. The shadow moved away. The footsteps circled again, slower this time. My heart felt like it was going to tear out of my chest.
I pressed my lips together, fighting the urge to make any sound at all. I realized how trapped I was. One door. No, windows big enough to escape through. No phone signal. No one who knew exactly where I was. After what felt like forever, the footsteps faded. They didn't rush off. They just slowly disappeared into the sound of the rain. I stayed frozen long after they were gone. My muscles burned. My mind kept replaying the sound over and over, afraid it would come back. Eventually, the rain started to weaken. The thunder moved farther away. The storm began to calm. When the rain was light enough that I could hear my own breathing again, I moved. Slowly, carefully. I stepped around the mattress and the trash, avoiding the back of the cabin. I went to the door and waited, listening one last time. Nothing. I opened the door and stepped out. The forest looked different in the softer rain. Brighter, less threatening. I didn't stop to look around. I didn't try to understand what had just happened. I walked fast, then faster, back towards the trail, ignoring the mud and the pain in my legs. I didn't look back at the cabin even once. Hours later, soaked, shaking, and exhausted, I reached the road. A passing car eventually stopped, and I got help. I never told anyone about the cabin in detail. I didn't want questions. I didn't want doubt. Ignore what I heard. I know how close it was. That cabin wasn't empty. It was never truly abandoned, and the scariest part wasn't the storm or the dark. It was knowing that I had hidden from someone who might have been hiding from me too, in the same small space, separated only by thin, rotting wood.
The rain started as a light drizzle, the kind that feels harmless and almost calming. I remember thinking it would pass in a few minutes. I was wrong. Within 10 minutes, the sky turned dark, like someone had pulled a heavy curtain over the day. The rain came down hard, thick drops hitting the ground so fast it felt like the earth was being punched over and over again. My clothes were soaked almost immediately. My hair stuck to my face and neck, and my shoes started making that wet, squishing sound with every step. I was walking along a narrow dirt road that cut through a forested area I didn't know well. Trees stood tall on both sides, their branches shaking violently as the wind picked up. Leaves flew around my face, some sticking to my wet skin. The road was turning muddy fast, and my shoes were slipping. I kept looking around, hoping to see a car, a house, anything. There was nothing. Just trees, rain, and the sound of thunder cracking somewhere above me. The rain got heavier, almost painful. It stung my skin, especially my arms and face. My phone was already useless, the screen dark and wet, refusing to turn on. I shoved it deeper into my pocket even though I knew it was probably already ruined. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold and partly from panic. Every thunder strike made my chest tighten. The forest felt endless, like I was stuck inside a moving wall of trees that kept shifting and closing in on me. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another group of trees. Then I noticed straight lines that didn't belong in nature. A roof line, a dark shape sitting back from the road, half hidden by bushes and tall grass. I stopped walking and stared at it through the rain. My heart was beating fast, but the idea of shelter pushed everything else aside. I stepped off the road and pushed through the wet plants, branches scraping my arms and legs. The cabin was old, really old. The wood was dark, almost black in some places from years of rain and rot. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and one corner looked like it might collapse if pushed hard enough. The windows were broken, jagged glass still clinging to the frames. The front door was hanging open, swinging slowly with the wind, making a low creaking sound that blended with the storm. I stood there for a moment, rain pouring down my back, trying to calm myself. I didn't want to go inside. Everything about it felt wrong, but staying outside wasn't an option. I was already cold to the point where my fingers felt stiff and numb. I stepped onto the small wooden porch. It groaned loudly under my weight, the sound sharp and sudden. I froze, waiting to see if it would break. It didn't. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mold, and something old and sour, like wet clothes left too long in a dark place. The inside was darker than I expected.
Only a little grey light came in through the broken windows. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, steady drops, forming small puddles on the floor. The floorboards were uneven, some warped upward, others sunken and soft. I stood just inside the door, breathing shallowly, listening. The rain was loud on the roof, almost drowning out everything else. Almost. Underneath, I could hear the cabin itself. Soft creaks, tiny cracking sounds, like it was slowly shifting and settling. It felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I took a few careful steps forward. Every movement made noise. My wet shoes squeaked against the wood. I tried to step only where the boards looked strongest, darker from years of pressure. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. I could see an old table on one side, one leg broken, so it leaned awkwardly. A chair lay on its side near the wall. There were shelves nailed into the wood, empty except for dust and what looked like old mouse droppings. I stayed near the door at first, telling myself I could leave quickly if I needed to, but the rain outside wasn't slowing down. If anything, it sounded worse. The wind slammed into the cabin, making the walls shake slightly. Each gust made my stomach drop. I moved farther inside, closer to the center, where the roof looked a bit more solid. Time felt strange in there. Minutes stretched out, each second heavy and slow. My clothes clung to my body, cold and uncomfortable. I wrapped my arms around myself, rubbing my hands together, trying to feel something other than numbness. My teeth started chattering, loud in the quiet space. I hated how loud it sounded. I noticed marks on the walls then, scratches, long thin lines carved into the wood, some crossing over each other. They didn't look new. They were darkened with age, filled with dust. I didn't know what made them, and I didn't want to guess. I forced myself to look away. Another loud crack of thunder made me flinch so hard I nearly lost my balance. The lights outside flashed white for a second, lighting up the whole cabin. In that brief moment, I saw more details than I wanted to. Old stains on the floor, a pile of rags in the corner that might have once been bedding, a broken lantern hanging from a nail, its glass shattered. When the light faded, the darkness felt heavier than before. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every small sound felt huge. Water dripping, wind howling through broken windows, the soft scurrying of something small inside the walls, probably animals trying to stay dry, just like me. I kept telling myself that was all it was. Animals, wood, wind, nothing else. At one point, the rain started coming in through a hole in the roof, dripping steadily onto the floor near where I stood. I moved away from it, afraid the water meant the roof was weaker there. I kept imagining it giving in, the whole thing collapsing on top of me. I looked up again and again, watching the ceiling, listening for changes in the sounds. Hours seemed to pass like that. My legs ached from standing, but I didn't trust the floor enough to sit down. My mind kept going in circles, jumping from one fear to another. Getting trapped, the cabin falling apart, not being found. The storm never seemed to end. Then, slowly, the sound of the rain changed. It went from a hard, constant roar to something softer, less aggressive. I didn't trust it at first. I waited, counting my breaths, listening carefully. The thunder moved farther away, the wind eased, the cabin stopped shaking. I edged toward one of the broken windows and peered outside. The forest was still wet and dark, but I could see more clearly now. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. Water ran down the trees and pooled on the ground, but the worst of the storm was over. Relief hit me so hard my knees felt weak. I leaned against the wall, careful not to put too much weight on it, and took a deep breath. Then another. My body slowly stopped shaking. I waited longer than I probably needed to, making sure the storm wasn't coming back. When it didn't, I decided it was time to leave. I stepped outside carefully, the porch creaking again under my feet. The air felt fresh and cold, but it didn't hurt anymore.
I looked back at the cabin one last time.
In the quiet after the storm, it looked even more broken, more tired, like it had given everything it had just to stay standing.
I went back to the road and started walking again, mud sticking to my shoes, clothes still heavy with water. But I felt different now, exhausted, shaken, but alive.
After a while, the trees thinned, and I could see lights in the distance. Real lights, houses, safety.
I never looked back after that. I kept walking until I reached help, until the forest and that cabin were far behind me. Even now, I can still smell the damp wood when I think about it. I still remember the sounds it made in the storm. But I made it out, and the cabin stayed where it was, alone in the woods, waiting for the next storm and the next person desperate enough to step inside. The rain started as a thin, annoying mist that stuck to my skin and hair, the kind that makes everything feel damp without really cooling you down. I had checked the weather before leaving, and it showed clouds but nothing serious. I believed it. That was my first mistake. I was walking a long trail that cut through a wide stretch of forest, one of those places that looks harmless during the day and feels completely different once the light changes. The path was narrow, mostly dirt, with tall trees packed so close together that they blocked out the sky in places. I had been walking for hours, my legs tired but steady, my mind quiet in that way it gets when you think you're in control. Then the sky changed fast. It went from gray to dark in minutes, like someone turned a dimmer switch all the way down. The air got heavy and thick, pressing against my chest. The rain stopped being light. It came down hard, all at once, loud enough that it drowned out every other sound. Big drops slapped against the leaves and the ground, and within minutes my clothes were soaked through. My shoes started sinking into the mud with every step, making a wet sucking sound when I pulled my feet free. I tried to keep going, thinking it would pass. That's what people always think, but the rain only got worse. Wind started pushing through the trees, bending branches and shaking loose dead leaves and small sticks that fell around me. The trail blurred into the ground, the edges disappearing under water and mud. I couldn't see far ahead anymore. Everything looked the same, dark trunks and wet leaves, the forest closing in on itself. My phone was useless. The screen kept going black from the water, and the signal was already gone. I held it close to my chest, like that would somehow protect it or me. My breathing got faster without me noticing at first. I could feel my heart beating hard, not from walking anymore, but from something deeper, a quiet fear growing under my ribs. That's when I saw the cabin. It didn't look welcoming. It looked wrong, like something forgotten on purpose. It sat off to the side of the trail, half hidden by trees and thick bushes. The roof sagged in the middle, and parts of the wood were dark and swollen from years of rain. One window was broken, the glass gone completely, leaving a black hole in the wall. The door hung crooked, not fully closed, moving slightly with the wind. I stood there for a moment, rain pouring down my face, my hair stuck to my cheeks and neck. I didn't want to go inside. Everything in me said not to. But the rain was cold now, and my hands were starting to shake. My clothes clung to my body, heavy and uncomfortable. The thought of staying out there, exposed in the storm, felt worse than stepping into something unknown. I pushed my way through the wet bushes and stepped up onto the rotting wooden porch. The boards creaked under my weight, soft in places like they might give out. I moved carefully, testing each step. The door was rough and splintered, and when I pushed it open, it let out a long, tired groan. Inside, the air was thick and stale. It smelled like old wood, damp earth, and something sour underneath. The light was low, even during the day, because the trees crowded close and the clouds blocked everything else. Rain leaked through holes in the roof, dripping steadily onto the floor. The sound of it echoed inside, slow and uneven. The cabin was small. One main room, no furniture except for a broken table pushed against the wall and what looked like the remains of a bed frame in the corner. The floor was covered in dirt, leaves, and bits of wood that had fallen from the ceiling. Everything looked abandoned for a long time, not just empty, but left to rot. I stayed near the door at first, my back close to it, like I might need to run. I listened hard, trying to separate the sounds. Rain on the roof, wind through the cracks, wood creaking as it shifted. Nothing else. Still, my body stayed tense, my shoulders tight, my jaw clenched. I moved further in, slowly. Each step felt loud in my head, even though the storm outside was louder. I avoided the darker corners at first, keeping my eyes on the floor, watching where I put my feet. There were old footprints in the dirt, half washed away, maybe from animals, maybe from people who had been here before. That thought made my stomach twist.
I found a spot near the wall where the roof seemed a little more solid, fewer drips. I sat down carefully, pulling my knees up, wrapping my arms around myself. My clothes were still soaked, and the cold started to sink deeper into my skin. I could feel it in my bones, a slow ache. My teeth chattered, and I pressed my lips together to stop the sound. Time stretched in that cabin. Minutes felt like hours. The rain didn't slow down. If anything, it got heavier. Water pooled near the doorway and crept across the floor. I shifted to keep my feet dry, but there was only so much space. The smell of wet wood grew stronger, making my head feel light. Every small sound made my heart jump. A branch hitting the side of the cabin, something scurrying in the walls, probably an animal hiding from the storm just like me. I kept telling myself that, probably. Still, I couldn't fully relax. My eyes kept moving, checking the corners, the broken window, the door. At one point, a loud crack echoed through the forest, sharp and sudden. A tree, maybe, breaking under the weight of the rain and wind. The sound was so close that the cabin shook slightly. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, and I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a long moment, I didn't move at all. I just listened, waiting for something worse to happen. Nothing did. The rain kept falling. The wind kept blowing. Eventually, the storm began to change. Not stop, but change. The rain softened from a roar to a steady, heavy fall. The wind calmed, losing its sharp edges. The light outside shifted just enough that I could tell time was passing. My body was exhausted, my muscles sore from tension and cold, but my mind stayed alert, refusing to rest. When the rain finally started to ease, it happened slowly. The sound on the roof became lighter, more spaced out. The dripping inside slowed. I stood up carefully, my legs stiff and shaky. I walked to the doorway and looked out. The forest looked different. Brighter, cleaner, like everything had been washed raw. Water ran along the ground in small streams. The air felt fresh, almost sharp. The trail was still there, muddy but visible again. The storm had passed, leaving behind a deep, quiet calm that felt almost unreal after all that noise. I stepped out onto the porch, testing the boards again. They held. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the wet air, letting my heart slow down. The cabin behind me was still dark and silent, just a shelter, nothing more. Whatever fear I had built around it stayed inside when I stepped away. I didn't look back when I returned to the trail. I focused on my footing, on the feel of the ground under my shoes, on the steady rhythm of my steps. The forest no longer felt like it was closing in. It was just trees again, just a path leading forward. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, the sky had opened up, pale light breaking through the clouds. My clothes were still damp, my body tired, but I was steady. The storm was behind me, the cabin was behind me. What stayed with me was the quiet understanding of how fast things can change, how quickly you can go from feeling safe to feeling exposed, and how sometimes survival comes down to choosing the least bad option and trusting yourself to get through it. I kept walking until the trees thinned and the path opened up, leaving the dark, wet forest behind for good.
The trip was supposed to be simple, just a long drive through empty land to clear my head. The sky had been dull all day, heavy and low, but the weather app said light rain at most. I trusted it more than my own instincts, which in hindsight feels stupid. By the time I realized how wrong it was, the road had already started disappearing under sheets of water. The rain came down fast, not slowly like normal rain. It slammed into the windshield so hard it sounded like gravel. My wipers were on full speed, but they couldn't keep up. The world ahead of me turned into a blur of gray and black, with headlights reflecting back at me in long shaking lines. There were no streetlights, no houses, no other cars. Just road, trees, and rain. Endless rain. Within minutes, the dirt shoulder of the road turned to mud. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. My hands were starting to ache. The car slid slightly once, just a small drift, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. I knew I couldn't keep driving like that. If the road washed out or I lost control, no one would even know where I was. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like nothing, just a darker shape between two trees when lightning flashed. I almost missed it completely, but another flash lit it up clearer, and I realized it was a structure. A cabin, small and crooked, sitting a little back from the road. The roof sagged in the middle, and one side leaned like it was tired of standing. It didn't look safe, but it looked solid enough to keep rain off my head. I pulled over without thinking too much. The car sank slightly into the mud as soon as I stopped. When I opened the door, rain poured inside instantly, soaking the seat and my clothes. The smell of wet earth hit me hard, thick and sharp. I grabbed my bag, slammed the door shut, and ran. The short distance to the cabin felt longer than it should have. Mud sucked at my shoes, trying to pull them off. Rain ran down my face and into my eyes, making it hard to see. My heart was beating fast, not from fear exactly, but from the pressure of the storm itself, like it was pushing me forward. The door to the cabin was already open, hanging crooked on one hinge. I stepped inside, and the sound of the rain changed instantly. Outside, it was loud and violent. Inside, it became a constant heavy roar, like something breathing around the walls. The air smelled old, damp wood, mold, and something sour I couldn't identify. The floorboards were uneven, some darker than others from water damage. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. Light came in through cracks in the walls and a small broken window on one side. Lightning flashed again, briefly filling the space with harsh white light. The cabin was empty. No furniture, no signs of recent use. Just bar walls, dust, and debris. Pieces of wood lay scattered on the floor, and leaves had blown inside and gathered in corners. The roof dripped in several places, water tapping steadily onto the floor. It wasn't dry, but it was better than outside. I moved further in, careful where I stepped. Every sound felt louder than it should have. The creak of the floorboards under my weight made my stomach tighten. I kept reminding myself that old buildings make noise. Wood shifts. It doesn't mean anything. I leaned my bag against the wall and wiped rain from my face with my sleeve. My clothes clung to me, cold and heavy. I could feel water running down my back. I hugged my arms around myself, trying to hold on to some warmth. That's when I noticed the marks. They were on the floor near the far wall, half hidden under dirt and leaves. Long lines scratched into the wood, uneven and deep. Not random damage. They went in the same direction, like something had been dragged. I crouched slightly, staring at them, my pulse picking up again. The scratches were old, edges softened by time, but still clear. He stood back up slowly. My breathing felt too loud in my ears. I scanned the rest of the cabin more carefully now. The walls had stains, dark patches that spread like shadows. Some boards had been nailed over cracks, badly and long ago. The window frame was broken outward, not inward, like something had forced its way out instead of in. I didn't like the way that thought sat in my head. Another loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, and instinctively I flinched. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. For a brief second, I wondered if the whole thing might collapse. I imagined the roof giving way, wood snapping, rain flooding in, trapping me under debris. The image was clear enough to make my throat tighten. But going back outside wasn't an option. I could barely see the road anymore. The storm showed no sign of slowing, so I stayed. Time stretched strangely in that cabin. My minutes felt longer. I sat on a dryish patch of floor near the wall, pulling my knees close to my chest. My phone had no signal, just a blank screen and a fading battery. I turned it off to save power, even though having it off made me feel more alone. The sounds became my whole world. Rain pounding the roof, wind pushing against the walls, making them groan, the steady drip of water hitting the floor. Every now and then, a louder creak would echo through the cabin, sharp enough to make me tense up. Each time I held my breath until it passed. At one point, I noticed footprints in the dirt near the entrance. Not fresh, but not ancient either. They were half-washed by rain, edges blurred. They didn't look like animal prints. They were uneven, like someone had been limping or dragging one foot. My chest felt tight again. I tried to reason with myself. People pass through abandoned places all the time. Hunt us, travel us, homeless people. It didn't mean someone was there now. Still, I kept glancing towards the door, listening harder than before. The storm reached its worst sometime later. Wind screamed through the trees, making branches scrape against the cabin walls. Rain forced its way through gaps in the wood, spraying in thin cold lines. The temperature dropped fast, and my teeth started to chatter. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, pressing my back against the wall, trying to make myself smaller.
Fear crept in slowly, not in a sudden rush. It settled in my stomach, heavy and uncomfortable. I wasn't afraid of ghosts or monsters. I was afraid of very real things. Of the cabin failing. Of someone finding me there who didn't want to be found. Of being stuck all night in the cold, soaked and alone. At some point, exhaustion dulled the edge of that fear. My body was tired from tension, from the drive, from the cold. I must have dozed off briefly, because I remember my head jerking up when a loud crack split the air. A tree branch had fallen nearby, the impact shaking the ground. When I checked my phone again, the battery was low, but it had been hours. The rain was still heavy, but it sounded different now, less violent, more steady. I watched the doorway, waiting, listening. Slowly, the storm began to ease. The wind died down first. Then the rain softened into a constant but manageable fall. The light outside changed, shifting from deep black to dark gray. Dawn was coming. When I finally stepped back outside, my legs felt stiff and weak. The air smelled clean in a way it hadn't before. Fresh washed. My car was still there, coated in mud but intact. The road looked rough but passable.
Before leaving, I looked back at the cabin one last time. In daylight, it looked smaller, sad almost. Just a broken structure slowly falling apart, holding trace of whatever life once passed through it. Nothing supernatural, nothing unreal, just neglect, weather, and time. I got in my car and drove away slowly, carefully. As the cabin disappeared behind the trees, a heavy feeling settled in me. Not relief exactly, but awareness, the kind that sticks with you. The reminder that danger doesn't always come with warning signs or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's just rain, isolation, and a place you step into because you have no better option. I reached the main road later that morning. Civilization returned like nothing had happened, but I carried that night with me. Not as a story about something unreal, but as a memory of how fragile safety can be when you're alone, caught in the wrong place, trusting that shelter is always safe. I was supposed to be home before dark. The rain was not even in the forecast when I left, just a cloudy sky and heavy air that felt uncomfortable but not dangerous. I remember thinking I would beat the weather easily. That thought stayed with me in a bitter way later, like a bad joke I kept replaying in my head. The rain started suddenly, not slow or gentle. It hit hard, like someone had dumped a bucket over the sky. Within minutes, my clothes were soaked and my shoes felt heavy with water. The road I was walking on turned slick and muddy. I could barely see ahead because the rain was blowing sideways, stinging my face and getting into my eyes. The sound was so loud it filled my ears and made everything else disappear. No cars passed, no lights, just rain and trees bending and creaking around me. I tried to keep walking, but my legs started shaking from the cold and from slipping too many times. My phone was useless. No signal, low battery, and the screen kept getting wet even though I tried to shield it under my jacket. That is when I saw the cabin. It sat a little off the road, half hidden by trees and tall grass. At first, I thought it was a shed or maybe an old hunting place. I did not want to go near it. Something about it felt wrong, like it had been forgotten on purpose. But the rain was getting worse, not better. The wind picked up and pushed against my back, almost knocking me forward. I was freezing. My hands were numb and my teeth would not stop shaking. The idea of standing outside any longer scared me more than the cabin did. So I stepped off the road and moved toward it, careful not to slip on the wet ground. Up close, the cabin looked worse. The wood was dark and swollen from years of rain. The roof sagged in the middle. One window was broken, and the other was so dirty I could barely see inside. The door hung crooked, slightly open, moving back and forth with the wind. Each time it moved, it made a low, rough sound like something breathing. I stood there for a moment, rain dripping from my hair and nose, trying to decide if this was a mistake. I went in. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mold, and something old and sour that made my stomach turn. The floor was dirt, not wood, and it was soft under my feet. Water dripped from the ceiling in several places, forming small puddles. I stayed near the door at first, ready to run back out if I had to. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. The only light came from the broken window and the crack in the door. There was not much inside. A broken table pushed against one wall. A rusted metal bed frame with no mattress. Old cans scattered across the floor, some crushed, some still whole. Everything looked untouched for years, maybe decades. Dust stuck to the walls in thick layers, mixed with spider webs that stretched from corner to corner. I felt like I was standing in a place that time had abandoned. The rain outside did not slow down. If anything, it got louder. The roof groaned as water pooled on top of it. Every strong gust of wind made the whole cabin shake slightly. I hugged myself and moved farther inside, away from the door. I did not sit. The idea of touching anything made my skin crawl. I just stood there, listening, breathing slowly, trying to calm myself. That was when I noticed the footprints. They were faint, pressed into the dirt floor near the bed frame. They were not old like the rest of the place. The edges were sharp, not smoothed out by time. They were not mine. My heart started beating faster, so fast I felt dizzy. I scanned the floor carefully and saw more marks, not just footprints but drag marks, like something heavy had been moved recently. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe a hunter. Maybe someone else had taken shelter here earlier in the storm, but the thought did not make me feel better. It made everything worse. If someone had been here, where were they now? I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The rain covered most sounds, but not all. I heard something else then. Not footsteps, not voices, just movement. Slow, careful movement outside the cabin. Leaves brushing against each other, branches snapping under weight. Someone was walking around, not rushing, not panicking like I had been. They were calm. I backed up until my shoulders touched the wall. My wet clothes clung to my skin, making me colder. My hands shook so badly I had to press them against my sides. The door moved again, pushed by the wind, but this time it did not swing back all the way. It stopped, like something was blocking it. The smell changed. Fresh, sharp, human. I could feel it before I fully understood it. The cabin felt smaller, tighter, like the air was being squeezed out. I stared at the door, unable to look away. My mind raced through every bad story I had ever heard, every warning I had ignored. Then the door moved again, slowly opening wider. I did not scream. I could not. My body locked up completely. A shape filled the doorway, dark against the gray light outside. I could not see a face clearly, just the outline of a person soaked from the rain. They stood there for a moment, not stepping inside, just looking. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I pushed past a table and slipped near the broken window, barely catching myself before I fell. I scrambled out through the opening, tearing my jacket on the jagged wood. The rain swallowed me instantly. I did not look back. I ran into the trees, branches cutting my face and arms, mud pulling at my shoes. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they would give out. I tripped and fell hard, knocking the air out of my chest. I lay there for a second, gasping, rain pounding into my back. I expected footsteps behind me. I expected hands grabbing me. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. I forced myself up and kept moving, slower now, careful not to make noise. Eventually, the trees thinned. The road appeared again, dark and shining with water. A car passed then, headlights cutting through the rain like a knife. I stepped out and waved both arms, not caring how I looked. The car slowed. The driver stopped. I do not remember much after that. I remember warmth. I remember shaking so badly I could not hold a cup. I remember police lights flashing against wet pavement. They asked me questions. I answered as best I could. They went to the cabin later, after the storm eased. They found signs someone had been using it, food wrappers, fresh footprints, a sleeping bag hidden on the old boards. Whoever it was had left before they arrived. I did not go back to that area. I did not need to. The fear stayed with me anyway. Sometimes I still smell damp wood when it rains. Sometimes I hear wind pushing against a door and my chest tightens.
I know now that the scariest things are not ghosts or stories. They are real people, real places, and real moments where you realize how close you came to not making it out.